Moving to there, maybe you can see me better that way. Our next keynote speaker is Ms. Eirini Lemos Maniati. As I said, she is here instead of William Alberg. From May 2018, Ms. Lemos Maniati serves as Deputy Director, Arms Control, Disarmament, and WMD Nonproliferation Center, Political Affairs and Security Policy at NATO headquarters. In this capacity, she deals with a lot of topics, believe me, a very long CV. One of the things she deals with is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear defense policy, including coordinating NATO's policy for preventing WMD proliferation. She coordinates with NATO partners and international organizations on these topics. Prior to this post, she has held high-level positions in NATO, including NATO Secretary General's representative for the OSCE. Her mother tongue is Greek, and she is fluent in English, French, and German, and has basic knowledge of Arabic. I don't know about your Hebrew, maybe a little bit. We're very pleased to have you address this conference. Please.
I will use the podium. Good afternoon, and thank you very much, Dr. Landau, for inviting me here today. I want to thank also the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, yes, for suggesting that I come and take part in this important discussion. I think this is the first time, one of the first times we are here at the INSS, and it gives me great pleasure to have the opportunity to present NATO's role in arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation in the next 15 to 20 minutes. So, to discuss the challenges that we face in the realm of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation with the expertise that exists here today, it's of course a great pleasure for me, but it's also a timely moment to discuss these issues. I don't have to tell anyone here today that our serious environment, the security environment, has changed dramatically over the recent years, and the world of arms control has been deeply affected, and this is nowhere more true as in the realm of nuclear, in the nuclear realm. Critical portions of the international arms control architecture related to nuclear weapons have been shattered, and other key elements are under unprecedented strain. We heard Dr. Ford, but let me also take the moment to look at the example of the INF. Let's consider it a little bit. Russia, over the better part of a decade, took actions in violation of the treaty, which culminated in the deployment of a ground-launched intermediate-range cruise missiles. It has deployed dozens of these missiles that are mobile, highly accurate, dual-capable, and able to reach European cities with limited or no warning time, with no capabilities to defend against. When confronted with the stark evidence of its wrongdoing, Russia chose to deny and distract, ignoring repeated calls from NATO allies to return to compliance. This included counter-accusations against the United States, brazen disinformation efforts at the UN and elsewhere, and even spent more than 4 years pretending they didn't even know about the missile's existence. Anything rather than engage in good faith to address the evidence of Russia's violation and work to salvage the treaty. The end result was both disheartening and inevitable. The US, faced with a persistent and unprecedented violation, had no choice but to suspend its participation in the treaty, because, as also Dr. Ford mentioned, no treaty can keep us safe if it is just respected by one side. its value dissipates if one party abandons that commitment, which US did with the full support of all the allies. And I say the full support of the allies. This was followed in August 2019 by the withdrawal and the effective end of the INF Treaty. This rather disheartening story illustrates two truths that are shaping our new nuclear security environment. One, that norms that have long constrained state behavior with regards to weapons of mass destruction are eroding, and this is something we heard it just a minute ago. Two, that the broader role of arms control in protecting our security is under strain, and some question its ability to adapt to the new environment. But the truth is that arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation are more important rather than less at times of insecurity and uncertainty. Arms control is not good in and of itself. They exist to reduce chances of accidental conflict, limit arms race, and reduce the availability of the most deadly weapons known for the mankind. They are part of the continuum of security and defense. And at NATO, we are committed to arms control as a key element of our security and a vital component of the alliance deterrence and defense posture. Still, there is no denying that we must adapt our approach to these times. So I will use my next minutes to talk a little bit about NATO's approach, what we don't do, what we do, and what we aspire to do. And underline that we must have a positive agenda. We must engage at the times of transition, at the difficult times, and use, when possible, NATO as a platform for regional and global challenges to address it with our partners. So let me take a moment about NATO's approach. NATO is an alliance governed by consensus. That means that everything we do on arms control and everything else reflects the shared will of every single ally. Consequently, there are some things we don't do. So we do not negotiate and we don't sign agreements. Only the individual allies can do that. NATO is fundamentally an instrument that allies use together to implement their shared vision for security, including arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. So, what is our policy on nuclear weapons? As our leaders declared in the Brussels summit in 2018, as long as nuclear weapons exist, NATO will remain a nuclear alliance. They stated that nuclear deterrence is the supreme guarantor of our security, and NATO allies maintain a nuclear capability with a fundamental purpose to preserving peace, prevent coercion, and deter aggression. We complement this with an enduring commitment to arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, and their essential contribution to achieving the alliance security objectives and for ensuring strategic stability and our collective security. In particular, allies are strongly committed to the full implementation of the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons in all its aspects, and our nuclear deterrence has always been fully consistent with the NPT. In other words, NATO's nuclear sharing arrangements have always been and will continue to be compatible with the NPT. And NATO is committed to taking practical steps that create the conditions for further nuclear disarmament negotiations and the ultimate goal of a world without nuclear weapons in full accordance with the NPT. This two-pillars approach, safe and secure and effective deterrence, combined with a commitment to effective step-by-step nuclear disarmament, has reaped huge rewards. It created the security and political conditions necessary for the arms reduction agreements that started with the INF in the late Cold War and continued through the New START in 2009. This has enabled extraordinary reductions of nuclear arsenals, including the reduction of forward-deployed nuclear weapons assigned to the defense of the alliance down to more than 90% from their peak at the height of the Cold War, and the reduction of the US and USSR stockpiles by a similarly massive amount. But what does this mean in practical terms? And how does NATO use this approach to respond to the new security environment? First of all, allies speak with one voice on nuclear disarmament issues. We have declared the common commitment to adhere to arms control obligations and laid out their ambition to strengthen the regime. We have jointly called on Russia, Iran, and North Korea, among others, to comply with their international arms control commitments and stop the destabilizing proliferation efforts. At NATO, allies support each other in negotiating arms control agreements in other bodies. We develop common positions so that we can speak in unison on arms control, just as we do on other aspects of our security. Where appropriate, we use NATO to help coordinate the implementation of our common commitment, our existing arms control regimes. For example, we work together at NATO to ensure that we comply with our conventional arms control obligations under, for instance, the Vienna document, which is a confidence and security building measure in the OSCE. NATO also offers a platform for allies and partners to tackle arms control and disarmament challenges together. NATO has a partnership with 1/3 almost of the UN family. We discuss these issues. We do that with all our partners, including Israel. Not surprisingly, we have a lot of shared interest, including on security challenges related to Iran's nuclear missile programs. It's invaluable for us to meet with partners, to exchange information and expertise, and to underline our shared security interests. We also use NATO as a platform for further discussions on national arms control initiatives and ensure substantial contribution to these approaches, to these issues in other bodies, such as the United Nations. And these discussions at NATO are likely to substantially contribute to initiatives for international arms control, such as the Creating the Environment for Nuclear Disarmament initiative, or the Stepping Stone initiative, which came from Sweden. Taken together, these efforts and the different roles make NATO both ambitious and effective on arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. Only 3 weeks ago, we held our WMD conference, and NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg laid out some of these specific ambitions when speaking in Brussels at the conference. He identified 4 critical priorities: preserving and implementing the Treaty of Non-Proliferation on nuclear weapons, adapting nuclear arms control to the new reality of our security environment, modernize conventional arms control, including the Vienna document, as I mentioned, is an important confidence and security building measure, and understanding how arms control can address the unique challenges of emerging security, including advanced missile technology. Now, a few words on missiles. The missile issue is especially relevant to our discussion today. There's no way to talk about nuclear disarmament without talking about missiles. Nuclear weapons effectiveness depends on their delivery systems. Verifying the dismantlement of missile systems tend to be far simpler and more straightforward than verifying the elimination of nuclear warheads. These fundamental facts were recognized by the US and the Soviets when they were negotiating and devised the INF Treaty. It focused on missiles and subsequently spent nearly 3 decades as a successful cornerstone of international security. Addressing missile proliferation and limiting missile capabilities is absolutely essential to making real progress on nuclear disarmament. At NATO, there has been deeply concerns regarding the proliferation for many years, particularly Iran's expansions of its missile arsenal, with the disregard of the Security Council resolutions and deteriorating regional stability. And not surprising, Russia's continued development of new missile capabilities with disturbing levels of inherent ambiguity, threatens to seriously undermine global security and risks, precipitating new arms race. We are also deeply concerned by the proliferation of missile systems of increasing sophistication from non-state actors. The attacks recently in Saudi Arabia suggest the grave threat posed by non-state actors using advanced missiles and other delivery systems with support from states. So, in addressing this growing missile threat, NATO is already exploring how our approach to arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation can address this missile threat. How can we strengthen the existing network of international export control agreements, Hague Code of Conduct, missile technology regime, Wassenaar arrangements that aim to limit missile proliferation and destabilizing missile development? But also, this is something that needs to be further worked and be open to any new initiatives that can curb the threat of increasing proliferation of nuclear weapons. As I mentioned, of missile technology, As I mentioned, the Secretary General put the Non-Proliferation Treaty as the cornerstone of our security. In April, it's going to be the 50th anniversary. We must preserve and implement the treaty as top of our priority. The heads of state and government declared in Brussels in 2018 that the NPT is the fundamental cornerstone of the global non-proliferation regime, and we're committed to its full implementation in all its aspects. And we will ensure that NATO's nuclear deterrence will remain fully compatible with the NPT, as will our efforts to strengthen arms control. So we applaud initiatives such as creating the condition of the environment for nuclear disarmament, because they bolster the international security architecture without excluding non-parties. Or the Stockholm Stepping Stone Initiative, which contributes to practical progress on disarmament. Reinforcing international arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation will require us to take into account the security interests of non-member states of the NPT as well. Even without major new agreements, we can do more to effectively implement the NPT as it stands. One particular focus is disarmament verification, which was also one of the areas where the Secretary General mentioned. Several allies and partners are working to strengthen the technical and legal foundations by which we verify the application of the NPT and other arms control, disarmament, non-proliferation instruments. This permits us to improve our implementation of these agreements and significantly increase their effectiveness, while sidestepping the challenges that we would face in trying to negotiate new instruments. So what can NATO do next? These efforts are designed to work with rather than against the fundamental context in which we all live in today. In the broadest terms, do we expect any earth-shattering breakthroughs on arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation, like major new arms limitations agreement? No. The political and security environment is simply too unpromising. But that doesn't mean there's no room for a positive agenda. In fact, a positive agenda is essential. We've heard about, I've spoken briefly about the Creating the Environment initiative. Maybe tomorrow and these days you hear about other initiatives. These efforts are more than just a signal of our continued commitment to arms control and eventual disarmament. They help to prepare a foundation for concrete actions for the moment where political circumstances change. One day, some members of the Russian leadership may ultimately realize that undermining the international security architecture serves no one interest, certainly not that of Russia's. And that day, when Russia recommits to meaningful international engagement, these initiatives will be ready to go. Iran may yet be convinced that its headlong pursuit of new missile capabilities erodes rather than bolsters its security. And China. China to date has refused to substantively engage in nuclear arms control, floating a narrative that this is a Western construct, largely irrelevant to China's strategic situation. But China's rise has implications for existing arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation. It has the world's largest, second biggest defense budget, and it's increasing the size and sophistication of its arsenal. It has hundreds of missiles within range that would have been prohibited under the INF Treaty, and recently displayed advanced weapons that could be able to reach US and Europe. This shows how far China has come. And yes, I'm not saying that China violates a treaty, but if we take no for an answer, we cede that space and we fail to advance our own message that engaging in arms control is one of the responsibilities that come with being a big power, a great power, and that it's an important element of international security, peace and stability. NATO allies and partners can help ensure that the international arms control regime is ready for the moment when other actors, like Russia, like Iran, like China, North Korea, realize that arms control is in everyone's security interest. And we cannot ignore what will happen if NATO allies and partners don't put forward a positive agenda of their own. Others will seize the podium. Russia has been aggressively portraying itself as a defender of arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation, even as it does everything possible to undermine the international security architecture, even as it systematically evades conventional arms control, even as it chose and ultimately destroyed the INF Treaty. If NATO and its partners do not take this opportunity to shape arms control to enhance global security, others will not hesitate to manipulate it for their own purposes and at the cost of the stability for others. NATO's positive approach let us remain forward and keep a forward momentum and help us to ensure that the future of arms control, whatever shape will take, strengthens our security and doesn't undermine the NPT or other key parts of the international architecture. Lastly, let's recall that arms control also sometimes offers a stepping stone to the unexpected. Before the INF Treaty was signed, few thought it possible that the agreement could succeed. The environment was too unpromising, the logic of arms race too inflexible. But not only it did work, it helped lower the requirements for deterrence and defense in Europe in a way that opened the door to the subsequent generation of arms control treaties, including START I, START II, and the suite of other European conventional arms control agreements. Even when there is no expectation of new agreements, the effort is worthwhile. By pursuing incremental steps and taking advantage of every opportunity to move the ball forward on arms control, we may find new opportunities to build trust and possibly address the political calculus that undermines arms control, which is always linked to security, stability, and peace. Let me conclude by saying that NATO is uniquely well positioned to pursue this approach. We are an alliance that promotes security through strong deterrence and a comprehensive approach to arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation. That means that the shared commitment to arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation that NATO has built between both nuclear and non-nuclear weapon states is robust and adaptable. In turn, this gives us the reach and credibility to bring every ally and a huge number of partners together to find durable solutions to these pressing challenges. Only by, just like the Secretary General's speech said, advocating for far-reaching, forward-looking, positive and ambitious agenda to strengthen arms control, even in the most challenging of circumstances, can we guarantee our continued security, allies and partners alike. We need to be clear-eyed of the impediments of existing measures and identify solutions to overcoming them. So for us, we need to have a positive, proactive agenda, continued engagement, and use NATO, the allies and the partners, as one of the platforms where we can discuss these global and regional challenges. And that concludes my intervention, and I want to thank you for giving me the time to give you NATO's approach to arms control, disarmament, and non-proliferation.
Thank you very much. We have time for one or two questions, if there are. Andre again.
It really wasn't my plan to answer to every statement, but here I am. I'm really tired of talking about INF Treaty, frankly. We have like a lot of discussions. I just have to state that during all of this time, neither US or NATO never showed any evidence of Russian alleged violation, like zero, none. So like some people might believe those accusations, but that's you have to put it out there. I have a specific question. You said that NATO could be a platform for regional arms control or stability or security. There was a letter from President Putin to Western leaders, including to NATO Secretary General, with a specific proposal to talk about moratorium on INF range deployments in Europe, including talking about verifications, like making sure that we all agree on what's going on. Because remind you, INF Treaty didn't have any verification; they lapsed in 2001. So here is a positive agenda you've been talking about. Will NATO take it? Will NATO engage? Thank you.
On the INF violation, I think here we have the US, and I'm sure they have shown evidence in terms of the INF violation, to the extent that for many years there were the discussions. Initially it was denied, then the missile was found, and then the question was about the range. So I think I am not in the discussions. I will leave here if somebody from the US administration wants to respond. But the fact that 29 allies came behind in support of the US decision, countries that have all been very supportive of arms control disarmament, it doesn't happen lighthearted. These are very serious decisions. They took a lot of thinking, but when you are faced with the stark evidence and effort, including in the NATO-Russia Council, to bring Russia back to the compliance, and these calls were not respected or were not heeded, I think the outcome was evident. So I leave it there. In terms of the moratorium, yes, we have seen the moratorium, but what is the moratorium when you have already deployed systems? This does not reflect the reality on the ground. Moratorium, they're deployed, the systems. The Russian systems are deployed. Europe doesn't have the systems. So what's the moratorium about?
So NATO response is not, will not respond, will not talk to you.
It's the... Sorry?
The results will be that the Russians will have, and you will not.
Yes, you said it.
That's clear.
Yeah. Just one more?
Yes, no.
So just this will be the last one.
The use of chemical weapons in our region has been one of the most brazen violations of arms control treaties for a while. Now, what is NATO's plan on restoring the OPCW and that and the moratorium in the use of chemical weapons? Is there a plan there?
We have, thank you very much, because I think the use of chemical weapons is actually a really grave violation of a taboo that we all thought never would come back. And we've seen it in Syria, but we've also seen it for the first time in a NATO country. So NATO has a policy, the CBRN defense policy, that puts efforts to prevent, to protect, and to mitigate consequences. In terms of the current situation of the OPCW, I think all our allies are firm supporters of the efforts to strengthen the OPCW. We have the investigative mechanism that has been put in place, and there's a full support in ensuring and restoring the strength of the OPCW to function and bring back the zero use of chemical weapons, which was the taboo that we all had, but it seems to be broken. And this is, I think Dr. Ford also mentioned, this is one of the non-proliferation regimes that everybody thought was very well respected, to our big surprise. So I think every effort is made in the context of our allies to ensuring that OPCW is strengthened. There are different initiatives. France, I think they have put also the impunity initiative. There are a number of initiatives that are putting in place to strengthen the mechanisms, strengthen the technical expertise in the OPCW, and ensuring that the organization can deliver on its mandate to ensure that we have a world free of the use of chemical weapons.